There is a moment, and most people who arrive at it do not announce it, when a person realizes that the strength they have been displaying was never really for themselves. It was a service, a performance, maintained not out of genuine self-command, but out of the accumulated expectations of everyone around them. They became the one who does not break, the one who absorbs, the one who, when a room grows heavy with other people's distress, quietly takes that weight and redistributes it so that no one else has to carry it fully. And for a while, sometimes for years, they do this without examining the cost. Then something shifts. The weight does not decrease, the requests do not slow, but something internal grows quieter in a way that does not feel like peace. It feels like erosion. This is the moment Stoic philosophy was built to address, not the dramatic collapse, the slow, invisible one. Epictetus on what cannot be borrowed. Epictetus was born enslaved. He did not write treatises in a private study. He taught in a school he built after his freedom, and what he taught was rooted in the one distinction he had spent a lifetime refining, the difference between what belongs to you and what does not. His framework, the dichotomy of control, is often treated as a simple idea. Do not worry about what you cannot control. But the depth of what he was pointing at is considerably sharper than that. He was pointing at identity itself. What belongs to you, in Epictetus's view, is not your body, not your reputation, not the way others interpret your behavior. What belongs to you is your faculty of judgment, your capacity to choose how you respond to what presents itself. Your inner life, the room inside the room, the place no outside force can enter without your permission. Now, apply that to the person performing strength for others. They have, without quite deciding to, handed the keys to that interior room over to someone else. The needs of others have become the schedule. The emotions of others have become the weather. And the steady, quiet act of tending their own inner ground, which Epictetus considered not optional, but the entire project, has been indefinitely deferred. Epictetus would not have condemned the impulse to care for others. He would have asked a single precise question: are you doing this from fullness or from fear? Are you giving from a self that is genuinely intact? Or are you giving to prevent the discomfort of being seen as the person who stopped giving? The distinction is not always comfortable, but it is always clarifying. The cost that does not announce itself. Musonius Rufus taught that philosophy without practice is decoration. He insisted that the Stoic life must be lived in the body, in the daily schedule, in the texture of ordinary hours, not preserved for elevated moments of reflection. And one of the most striking implications of his teaching is this: you cannot sustain work that draws from a reservoir you never refill. The language of virtue in people you chose to carry, which then generates guilt, because you also chose to carry them and you do not want to resent them. The loop is quiet and it is expensive. Musonius would have named this with his characteristic plainness. You have trained yourself to ignore your own signals, and any training, repeated consistently enough, becomes character. The person who has trained themselves to override their own interior cues in service of others does not simply exhaust themselves occasionally. They gradually lose access to the interior they were meant to inhabit. The Stoic practice of honest inventory. There is a practice inside Stoic tradition, not mystical, not elaborate, that addresses this directly. It is the practice of the evening review. Marcus Aurelius kept private notes for this reason. Seneca wrote to himself in letters before he ever wrote to Lucilius. The practice is not self-congratulation, and it is not self-punishment. It is honest inventory. The questions are simple. What did I do today? What was mine to do? And what was I doing on behalf of someone else's discomfort? Where did I act from my own judgment? And where did I act to manage someone else's impression of me? What did I neglect in myself that I would not have permitted to be neglected in another person I cared about? This inventory is not designed to produce guilt. Guilt, in the Stoic framework, is simply another form of drama. It focuses the attention on the self as a site of failure rather than as an instrument that can be recalibrated. The inventory is designed to produce data, and data, honestly gathered and honestly reviewed, is the foundation of any real adjustment. Seneca wrote, in his letters to Lucilius, that we must withdraw into ourselves as much as we can. He did not mean isolation. He meant the practice of return, the regular, deliberate act of coming back to one's own interior, checking its condition, and choosing to tend it before the next demand arrives. Not because the demands are wrong, because a person who does not tend their own ground eventually has nothing left to offer from it. The difference between giving and disappearing. The Stoics were not advocates for withdrawal from human life. Stoic philosophy is profoundly social. It insists on duty, on connection, on the responsibilities that come with being a rational creature embedded in a community. But the Stoic version of social duty is grounded in the concept of genuine virtue, and genuine virtue requires a genuine self to express it. You cannot give what you do not possess. You cannot model steadiness for others if your own steadiness is theatre rather than substance. Cleanthes, the man who succeeded Zeno and led the Stoa for nearly 3 decades, was known not for brilliance but for endurance. He worked physical labour at night to support his studies. He was not glamorous or rhetorically dazzling, but what he expressed across decades of consistent effort was a self that was genuinely his own. He was not performing for the approval of the Stoa's social hierarchy. He was building something internal, at cost, because he understood that what he had to offer was only as real as the interior it came from. That is the model. Not withdrawal, not performance, not the performance of non-performance, which is simply another version of the same problem. Genuine giving, the kind that does not hollow the giver, comes from a self that has been honestly tended. That tends itself consistently, even when no one is observing the tending. Especially then, when the performance finally stops. What happens when a person stops performing strength for others and begins practicing it for themselves is not, as might be feared, a collapse of their relationships or their usefulness to those around them. What typically happens is simpler and stranger than that. The people who received the performed strength often do not immediately notice the difference. But the person who stopped performing it notices immediately. The quality of their attention changes. The quality of their presence changes. Because they are no longer partially absent, divided between the room they are standing in and the interior audit they are conducting at the same time, trying to determine how their performance is landing. Epictetus described the free person not as someone who has removed all difficulty from their life, but as someone who is no longer governed by the opinions and needs of others as the primary organizing principle of their choices. That freedom is not loud. It does not make speeches. It shows up as a particular quality of steadiness, the kind that other people can sense without being able to name it. Not the performance of steadiness. Steadiness itself, the invisible emotional labor that has been exhausting you, was not the problem. Labor is not the problem. The Stoics placed enormous value on work. The problem was that the labor was invisible to the one person who needed to account for it, you. Once it is seen, named, and honestly assessed, it becomes something that can be managed rather than something that manages you. The interior that was eroding can be returned to. It does not disappear. It waits. It is, as Epictetus insisted, the one thing that has always been yours and has never stopped being yours. Tend it. Not for dramatic effect, not to make a statement about your limits. Tend it the way a craftsman tends their tools, because the quality of everything that comes from you depends entirely on the condition of what you are working with. Daily, quietly, without performance. That is the practice. That is how the strength becomes real. If this moved you, comment "The Citadel holds" below. It is our sign that you carry the philosophy with you. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.